Constantine's Sacred Relics. Rob Allen here for Through Eternity Tours. Last episode we covered Santa Maria Maggiore and San Lorenzo. If you missed it, catch up before we dive into Constantine's Rome. Today, sacred relics that changed Christianity forever and the Pope's true cathedral. Let's pick up where we left off.
All right, so we're at the second church out of 7. We're close to noon, so we're a little running behind time, but I'm determined that we're going to get this through.
Let's see our route a bit. From here at San Lorenzo, we need to get to Santa Croce in Gerusalemme, which has some of the most important relics of the Catholic faith. So before we head to Constantine's sacred relics, we're going to stop for lunch. Stopping into Pinza e Buoi di San Lorenzo, we had a nice leisurely lunch, as one should do in Rome. Focaccia with caprese, fresh mozzarella, tomato, basil. Pasta alla norma with fusiloni, eggplant, tomato, ricotta salata. This is how Romans actually eat. No rush, even when you're on a pilgrimage.
So as part of our journey today, we're walking in an area by the walls of Rome at the Porta Maggiore, one of the main gates of ancient Rome. And as I said before, this is where we have the aqueducts converging, being reused later on in 275 AD to make the walls. The aqueducts. There were 11 aqueducts of ancient Rome. 8 of them converged here. We're at one of the highest points of the city. And what we have is a restoration and an aqueduct, the Aqua Claudia, built by Claudius, the emperor, the 4th emperor of Rome, and then reincorporated to make the walls. Now, what's interesting is at the gate, you still have this bugnato rustico, this rough-hewn stone that was indicative of the time of Claudius, but it goes out for 2 roads. It doesn't seem like it, just seems like there are 2 arches here, but one of the arches is actually pointing this way to the Via Prenestina and that way to the Via Casellina before this was built. We have the baker's tomb, because people were buried outside the walls. To be a baker meant you had a lot of money, because the government doled out flour to all the people of Rome. Remember, bread and circuses, this is how they were fed. And then they had to go to a baker who would bake it for them. And this is recreating the ovens where they would bake the bread with all these discs, these holes. And it's strangely enough, it looks like it's something modern. Closer up to it, you'd be able to see some friezes showing the baker baking the bread.
Want to experience this yourself without the 25-kilometer walk? Check out througheternity.com for our Vatican tours, Jubilee walks, and underground Rome experiences. Our expert guides handle the logistics. You just focus on the history.
And our next destination is within sight, Santa Croce in Gerusalemme, that has some of the most important relics of the Catholic faith. When Constantine became the first Christian emperor of Rome by creating the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, he moved to create a new capital for the Roman Empire, what's today known as Istanbul, but was called Constantinople. So who was running things in Rome when he left? His mother. She then took it upon herself to go to the Holy Land and bring back relics of the event of the Passion of Christ, including pieces of the original cross, pieces of the cross of the good thief, some of the thorns in the crown of thorns, some of the nails, and even the sign INRI, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. These very important relics. And then also the finger of doubting Thomas are kept inside this church. That is why it is so important, and obviously why it's one of the 7 churches to visit for the Jubilee. The benefit about this is that San Giovanni is quite close to Santa Croce, probably the 2 closest churches in this itinerary today. And we get to see a lot of things along with the walls and the aqueducts of Rome. We get to see Santa Maria del Buon Aiuto. It saved the Pope, Sixtus IV, from getting soaking wet in a rainstorm. Kind of funny to think about that now in the middle of the summer in Rome, but there it is.
If you're enjoying this Jubilee journey, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps other travelers discover Rome's hidden stories.
Here we are at San Giovanni in Lateran, which is mother of all churches in Rome and of the world, the Cathedral of Rome, where the Pope is the seat, the bishop of this city. So after this stop, we're going to go through the Holy Door, and we are more than halfway through in our day. But the second half is probably a little more challenging because the distance between the churches is just a little bit longer. Andiamo! Rome is filled with many beautiful things. Aqueducts, ancient ruins, beautiful churches, and also doors. It has some of the most beautiful doors in the world. Case in point, right here. The doors for St. John of Lateran are actually from the ancient world, from the Curia where the Senate met, a building that dated back to the 4th century, so over 1700 years old. They were brought here. And we can walk right up to them and see them. You shouldn't touch them, but one could. Still a functioning door. It can open up and close. It is these panels in the center that are the original ones. You can see a slight discoloration, right? And these stars are connected to the Pope who had this brought over here. Alexander VII, the Kiji Pope, because the stars were part of his symbol. But that's why you have these frames here, because they needed to fit it within the frame of this church. Okay, so let's take a look around and find out what exactly is so special about the Church of St. John of Lateran. So always a beautiful piece to look at is something that was saved from the balcony of the original facade of this church. Remember, St. John of Lateran's been changed around a lot through the centuries. This shows a fresco by Giotto in the year 1300 when Boniface VIII commemorated the very first Holy Year celebrated in the Catholic faith. A few of the things that are fascinating about the Church of St. John of Lateran, it's in the shape of a cross, but the nave, think of it like a ship, the central corridor was redone by Francesco Borromini. All Baroque is about movement, but he had some certain restrictions in the space that he had to work with. And so he creates these niches for the beautifully sculpted apostles. These are some of the most beautiful statues you see in Rome. That's not an easy feat. And then you have these friezes that are depicted above events of like the Great Flood, events of the Old Testament, and then the prophets. So the structure of this is very similar in certain ways to the structure of the decorative motif of the Sistine Chapel. The gilded gold ceiling was done by the behest of Pius V. But the transept, which is the horizontal beam of the cross, is done earlier, not in the 1650s, but the late early 1600s, done during the Manneristic time period at the behest of Clement VIII. And it was done by the same guy who designed the mosaics in the Dome of St. Peter's. His name was Cavaliere d'Arpino, the Knight of Arpino, who was the most famous person at the time. And Caravaggio worked for him. Everyone wanted his work, but later on, no one even knows who he is. Some of the great, most important relics that we can enjoy are the relics of the heads of Peter and Paul. We also have a piece of the Last Supper table, among other important relics. A calling card for Francesco Borromini, the great Baroque architect, is that in a lot of his work he has these cherub heads of angels, and wings. But for me, I think it's a resolution of a problem to create more movement in a static construction that Borromini was obliged to fit. So in the minor naves, if you know where to look up above, you can see the angel heads with the wings everywhere you look.
This is exactly why Through Eternity created our Jubilee 2025 tour. We show you these sacred relics and the stories behind them that most visitors never hear. Our expert guides bring 1,700 years of Christian history to life.
Leaving from St. John of Lateran, we're walking towards the ancient Appian Way. And of course, we're going to walk by this baptistry, which is one of the oldest in the world. It dates back to the 5th century, built by Sixtus III, beautifully decorated on the inside. And I always remember that. It used to be for a point, before you were baptized, you were not allowed outside of the church. That's why baptistries were built outside of the churches.
2 papal basilicas down, we've seen Helena's impossible relics and walked through the Pope's true cathedral. But the most challenging part of this pilgrimage is still ahead. Next episode, we're heading underground where early Christians hid from persecution. We'll descend into catacombs that most tourists never see and walk the ancient Appian Way to St. Paul's tomb. Subscribe and ring the bell so you're notified when we go underground. See you on the Appian Way.